At precisely 3 a.m., deep inside the presidential palace of Ouagadougou, a secure line rang, a sound rarely heard but never ignored. President Ibrahim Traoré jolted awake, heart pounding, drenched in sweat. Only 5 people in the world had access to that emergency satellite phone. When he answered, a voice from Tehran pierced the stillness. "Mr. President," the caller said urgently, "forgive the hour, but we don't have the luxury of time. Our cities are under fire. We need your attention. Now." It was Iran's foreign minister calling from a command center as Israeli airstrikes hammered strategic targets across Iran. But the conversation wasn't about Iran's suffering alone. What he told Traoré would mark the beginning of a seismic shift in geopolitics, one that would thrust Africa into the eye of the world's most dangerous conflict. Though tensions in the Middle East had dominated global headlines for weeks, Africa had remained a quiet observer until that moment. From behind the palace's bulletproof glass, Traoré saw his security personnel suddenly moving with urgency, responding to fresh intelligence alerts. Still gripping the phone, Traoré steadied his breath. "Minister Zarif," he said, "how can Burkina Faso help in such dark times?" The minister didn't hesitate. "Israeli forces are not just targeting us here. They are expanding into Africa, quietly, surgically. We have intercepted evidence that Israel is establishing secret operational hubs across the continent. They're using African soil as a forward base for broader conflict." Traoré's blood ran cold. Months earlier, his government had dismantled a covert Israeli surveillance network operating within Burkina Faso. At the time, he'd suspected there was more to it. Now he had confirmation. What he didn't know was how vast the web had become. "We have credible intel," the minister continued, "showing Israeli-linked activity in over a dozen African countries, ports, airfields, intelligence posts. They consider Africa part of their war theater. But we have a counteroffer, one that changes everything." Traoré sat up straighter. Zarif's voice lowered. "Mr. President, Iran proposes a strategic alliance with Africa. With you, advanced missile defense systems, energy technology, and economic independence. In exchange, all we ask is partnership, shared intelligence, diplomatic support, and if needed, access to your airspace for defensive operations." The offer was enormous, dangerous, transformative. Burkina Faso, landlocked and often overlooked, could suddenly become a central pillar in a rising coalition. Energy autonomy, military security, continental influence. But the price, involvement in a brewing regional war. "Minister," Traoré replied carefully, "you're asking us to become a battleground." "No," Zarif said. "I'm telling you the battleground already includes you. You just haven't seen the map yet." The call ended, and with it, Traoré's illusions of neutrality. Minutes later, he summoned his top cabinet to an emergency 4 a.m. meeting. Exhaustion hung heavy, but urgency burned brighter. Defense Minister Caboret opened the session grimly. "We've reviewed the intelligence package sent from Tehran," he said, spreading photos and reports across the table. "Israeli-linked operations are deeper than we imagined. Satellite images showed weapons transfers, training camps near borders, communication outposts embedded in NGOs. They're not just watching us," Kabore continued. "They're staging something." Foreign Minister Sawadogo added, "Iran proposes we join a counter-network, a united African front. Their support would include missile defenses, economic collaboration, and technology independence." Traoré didn't flinch. Intelligence Chief Ouedraogo presented the most damning revelation. 12 African nations host active Israeli advisors, he said, military assets, surveillance technology, even private contractors overseeing resource extraction, all reporting directly to Tel Aviv. Traoré clenched his jaw. "Iran says they can expose and neutralize these networks," Sawadogo pressed. "If we agree." The room sat in tense silence. No one wanted to speak the obvious truth, until Traoré said it aloud. "According to this data," he murmured, "we're already combatants in someone else's war. We just didn't know it." By sunrise, Traoré had made his first move. "Schedule a secure video meeting with Tehran," he ordered. "I want the full proposal, and start quiet outreach to our partners across the continent. Africa deserves to see what's happening on its soil." His advisors exchanged cautious glances. They knew what this meant. Entering Iran's orbit would shatter existing diplomatic relationships, particularly with Western allies and Israel. But Traoré was resolute. "We've been pieces on other people's chessboards for long enough," he said. "It's time we moved our own." The next night's secure video conference was explosive. Iranian intelligence officials presented evidence too detailed to dismiss. Intercepted Israeli communique, maps showing expansion strategies, naval route blueprints. They followed with an outline of their offer: missile shields, AI surveillance defense systems, clean energy grids, and debt-free investment structures. But Traoré's response stunned even Tehran. "This intelligence concerns all of Africa, not just Burkina Faso," he said. "If we move forward, it must be with the African Union involved. This cannot be a secret pact. It must become a continental strategy." Within 72 hours, Traoré had initiated secure calls to more than a dozen African presidents. Some were skeptical, others were furious, most were stunned. None had seen the level of foreign military penetration now exposed. Weeks later, an emergency African Union summit convened in Addis Ababa. Iranian diplomats were allowed to present their findings in a historic closed session. The room erupted. Some delegates warned of dragging Africa into proxy wars. Others demanded immediate action. Traoré stood and addressed the room. "If our borders are being used for war," he said, "then we are already participants, whether we choose to see it or not. This isn't about taking sides in the Middle East. It's about reclaiming sovereignty here, at home." Debate raged through the night. But 6 months later, the effects were undeniable. A new continental security framework had been born. African nations began sharing real-time military intelligence. Joint protocols were established to monitor foreign actors on the continent. Several countries expelled Israeli-linked advisors operating without full disclosure. Iran, meanwhile, had quietly begun deploying advanced radar and defense tech in cooperation with African governments. Burkina Faso became a hub, not of war, but of resistance to being used. The transformation was historic, but it came at a cost. In the months that followed, 3 separate assassination attempts targeted President Traoré. One was narrowly foiled outside a diplomatic summit. Israeli intelligence operations ramped up. Western powers issued subtle threats, followed by real sanctions. Burkina Faso's economy took a hit, but Traoré's approval among his people soared. Why? Because for the first time in generations, many Africans felt their leadership was responding to foreign manipulation with strength, not silence. A year after that 3 a.m. call, President Traoré stood before the United Nations General Assembly. When Tehran called, they asked for partnership, he said. What they offered wasn't just weapons or trade, it was something far more rare: respect. He paused, looking across the chamber. "Others have used our lands to wage their wars. They built military outposts, dug for minerals, and never asked us who we were. They treated our sovereignty as optional. But those days are ending." He gestured to a delegation of African leaders sitting united behind him. "Africa is no longer a passive observer in global conflict. We decide our role. And when we speak, it won't be whispers from the shadows. It'll be with one voice, one purpose." The applause was thunderous, not just from African allies, but from small nations worldwide who'd grown tired of being silenced by power. That night, as he walked alone through the UN corridors, Ibrahim Traoré's mind returned to that phone call in the dark. One voice had shattered the silence, and from it, a continent woke up. The risks had been immense, the threats real, but the result undeniable. Africa had found its footing, and it was no longer asking permission to stand.